Alright, in the previous videos we talked about fixing the physics of throwing objects and grabbing them a little bit to make it more natural, and also adding haptics so I can feel the cubes on the table in front of me. I've layered in some additional stuff here to turn this into a little mini game, and let me just hit play and show you guys. So essentially what I have is a table full of little blue cubes, and I can reach out and grab them, and I throw them towards a couple goals. It's gonna add some audio to beep in my ear. Oh, missed that one. And see if I can do double. There we go. It'll also spawn new cubes onto the table for each one that goes into the goal. Adds a little particle effect. Has a counter to count up how many I've gotten. Right, so we have, again, kind of very redundant multi-sensory feedback. There's audio, there's visuals, there's text information, and I have an infinite amount of cubes to turn this into a little game. So let's talk about how to implement some of this stuff. The first thing we need to do is to create a new goal for the cubes to get thrown into. So I have a table full of cubes here, and I want to be able to toss them into something. So we're going to need to make some geometry that we can throw towards, and I'm just using a simple 3D cylinder, and we'll just put that out here. And we'll get it roughly sized there. And move me out of the way a little bit. I created a material for that that's just kind of a transparent green, something we can see through. You also see this little sphere inside of that. That's the capsule collider that comes on the cylinder object. So that's going to be useful. That's something we can throw, and the physics systems can detect a collision between the cubes and the cylinder. We do want to make sure that that's set as a trigger, otherwise when we throw the cubes they'll just kind of bounce off of the cylinder. We don't want that to happen. So a trigger will let us detect the physics collision without actually stopping the cube from entering. On top of that, we'll also want to add maybe a little bit of text. And we're also going to add a particle effect, and this is going to start to get complicated. So I want to be a little bit organized about this. So I'm going to actually create an empty game object, and we will rename this our goal. So part of the goal is our cylinder here, and part of it will be a UI text object, which comes with a canvas. And again, we'll put that under the goal. This is a system that comes with the UI to allow touch input and that kind of stuff. I'm just going to delete it. We don't need that for now. And we will have to make some changes here. Canvases by default are screen-based objects. They would be a screen-based UI. That doesn't work in VR, so we need to change it to be a object that's positioned out in the world. So we'll go from screen space overlay to a world space object, and you can see that it's this giant canvas here. So we need to scale that down quite a bit. And if I can type here, 0.01. So that should give us a decent sized text canvas. We're going to zero out the position so it's actually positioned better relative to our goal. Let's zero out the cylinder too, make sure everything's in the same spot. Alright, so we have our canvas. We do need to shrink it down a little bit more. Maybe make it 100 by 100. And that gets us into roughly the right spot, and we can raise it up a little bit here. All right, so let's look at our text object now. Well, we have a 0 by default, and we'll align that in the center. And you can see the text is really pixelated. It's better if we ramp up the size of this, have a very large object. We don't want to truncate it when it overlaps. We'll just have it overflow the box if it gets too big. And again, we'll center that, raise up our, well, no, the canvas is probably in a good spot. Once we've blown up the font size to make it big, then we can actually scale the object down. And the effect that has is of making the text very crisp. So the font size is going to basically add more pixels to the text, and then shrinking it down makes it sharper. So we can probably go a little bit further with that. All right, so that should be nice and easy to read from a distance. Okay, and again, I can add a particle effect to that and other things. So I'm going to jump back into some of the stuff I've pre-built. We're not going to walk through building it up entirely from scratch because that'll take too long. What I've done is save the finished version as a prefab. So if I take my goal here that we built by hand and drag it down into my assets, you can see it shows up there as a pre-built object, and I can drag them back into the screen and add more and more. But let's go ahead and get rid of that for now, and we're just going to look at the one that's already kind of built out. This one, we added an extra light just to add a little glowing effect. That's probably unnecessary. And the particle system here just kind of goes, particle systems have a lot of settings to them, so again, I don't want to walk through setting that all up. The important part here is that it's a fairly short duration that emits kind of a lot all at once, so it goes in one quick burst, and then the looping is turned off so it doesn't just go and go and go. We also turn off the playing on awake so it doesn't start immediately and just go constantly while it's on. But that's about all there is to it. We have our canvas with the text, we have our goal system, the collider set up as a trigger. So now we have to have a script that's going to react. So it's not enough to just make this goal system, but we have to make it react to the collision. So I wrote a scorekeeper script that I attached on here. Let's go ahead and look at that. And the first thing I did was add variables that give me a link to the particle effects and to the score text. We added a beep sound effect, so that kind of thing. The other thing I'm going to do is add a string that's just a label, something I can watch for. So I don't want the score to go up every time anything hits the goal region. So for example, if I walk the player controller into the score region, it's just going to ramp the score up and up and up. That's not very helpful. So I want to have something that I can actually watch for and put a label on these cubes. So I called it toss cube. And Unity has this idea called tags. So a tag is kind of like a name, but you'll see in the hierarchy here, each of these cubes has a different name, so that makes it a little difficult. We don't want to tell it to watch for cube and cube 1 and cube 3 and cube 8. Right? So we want to have a common name that all of these can share, and that's up here in the inspector on these tags. So I'm going to highlight all my cubes, and we'll tell it to apply the tag toss cube. And that's a tag I already defined. If you want to add your own tags, you just click on add tag and hit plus and give it any name that you like. All right, so theoretically our goal could watch for my thing instead of toss cube, and that would be up to you. All right, let's jump back to the script. And we'll get back to these in a moment. This is how it's going to regenerate more objects for us. So initially our score is 0, I've made this variable private. It doesn't need to show up in the inspector. It shouldn't be something we're typing in. It's just kind of internally keeping track of the score. We're not really doing anything with the start or the update. We can actually get rid of those. And all we're doing is looking for on-trigger enter events. So when one of the cubes flies and it hits this region, we want it to react. So the first frame that it enters the region. And we're going to do a couple things. The first thing we're going to do is check the tag. So a collision happened, so we're going to say, is it a collision with the right tag? If that's true, we'll go in and do stuff. If it's not, we just do nothing. We ignore it. So the first thing we're going to do is add some visual feedback. So again, multi-sensory feedback for the user. We'll change the score. We'll add 1. So this will go from 0 to 1 to 2 and so on. And we're going to take our variable and increment it. So we'll add 1 to it. And then we're going to take the score text, this text objects that we created, and update what it displays. We'll do that. We'll take the particle system and we'll tell it to turn on and play itself. Since it doesn't loop, it'll only play once. We could do things changing the light color if we wanted to. We'll skip that for now. And we can also play the auditory feedback. So whatever clip that happened to be, we're going to play one shot of it. And let's go ahead and test this real quick. Let's see where we're at. So I should be able to pick up my cube, toss it in, and it plays the sound effect, plays the particle effect, and increments my score. The part it's missing right now is that it's not spawning any more cubes. So once I throw these here, we're just kind of done. All right, so let's go ahead and fix that part. Okay, so if I jump back to the script here, you can see it's doing a couple things, or it should be doing a couple things. It's not doing it because we're generating an error because I'm missing a spawn point here. So what we wanted to do is to have some kind of spawn point, which is just a 3D location. Where should it generate new cubes? And then it's going to instantiate a new one, right? So one hits the goal, we're going to make a new one for you. And the other thing we're going to do is destroy the old cubes. So we don't want to have infinite amounts of cubes as we create more and more and more. We want them to go away eventually. So we always have about, say, 10 or so cubes in the game. The reason that's generating an error is because I never specified what the new thing is it should generate. So I never told it. Oh, I guess it does know about the cubes, but it doesn't know about the spawn point. It doesn't know where to generate them. So since it had an error, it never got to the destroy the old cube part. So let's go ahead and do that. We'll create just an empty 3D node in the scene. So it has an XYZ position, but it doesn't have any geometry or anything attached to it. And we'll just drag this over and make it spawn above the table there. And I can rename this spawn cubes here. All right. And it doesn't really matter where that is with our hierarchy. And we're just going to take our goal and we're going to tell it about that spawn point. So we'll just drag that and drop it into that slot. And that should work a little bit better for us. Alright, and I think I told it to use the blue cubes instead of the red cubes, so we're going to end up with a bunch of blue cubes as we go. Alright, and that's about it. We now have a goal that we can throw into. It beeps at us when we hit it, it increments a score, it keeps track of it, it gives us some more things to throw. And again, since this is a prefab, you know, I can copy and paste this guy and create multiple goals, and they should all work about the same. All right, the one thing we'll have to double check is to make sure that it knows about our spawn point and it knows about our cubes, and it can access those things. Um, And theoretically, if you wanted to have some kind of global score instead of each goal having its own score, you could just have the goalkeeper script access a different text object that's accumulated for everything. So there we have a very basic, simple tossing game with the Oculus Rift and the touch controllers. We have physics objects, we can have a little bit of haptic feedback, and we've mixed it all together to create a very, very basic game.